For this week's episode, we're looking at the story behind another of the legendary 13 Primes, the Guardian of Time, Vector Prime. Vector Prime was introduced in 2005's Transformers Cybertron. His toy transformed from an ancient robot with a body made of clockwork gears to a space cruiser, and came packaged with his Minicon partner, Safeguard, who turned into a spaceship that doubled as a blaster for Vector. Vector Prime was one of the first 13 Transformers, divinely powerful robots created at the dawn of time by the God of Light, Primus, to help him battle the Dark God, Unicron. The wise and noble Vector had the power to manipulate space and time, controlling its flow, time travelling at will, and even moving between dimensions, cutting portals in reality with his sword, Rizzling. After Unicron was defeated, Primus entered hibernation in the form of the planet Cybertron, and Vector Prime left this dimension, withdrawing outside of time to watch over the time stream and defend it against threats. He and his siblings were forgotten by modern-day Transformers, though one trace of him did remain. His face became the inspiration for the Autobot insignia. As the Cybertron cartoon began, Vector Prime at last returned to his homeworld, drawn there by the formation of a colossal black hole near the planet, caused by the Autobots' destruction of Unicron in the previous series, 2004's Transformers Energon. Knowing that this deadly Unicron singularity was destined to consume all of time and space, Vector guided the Autobots in gathering the Cyber Planet Keys, fragments of Primus's power scattered across the galaxy, with which they could reawaken their creator to seal the black hole. In the course of their adventure searching for the keys, the friendships that Vector forged with the Autobots and their human allies gave his once solitary life new and greater meaning.
I finally understand the true value of time, for it is the bonds between us that give time its meaning.
Vector Prime's history as one of the original 13 Transformers wasn't explored in the cartoon. Instead, it was fleshed out by supplementary material, including a comic published by the Transformers Collectors Club, and by Ask Vector Prime, a feature on the official Transformers website in which Vector answered questions sent in by fans. Towards the end of the cartoon, the Autobots were stranded in another dimension. To return them home so they could save the universe, Vector Prime chose to sacrifice himself, pushing his powers beyond their limits to reverse time and reopen the portal between dimensions. The strain of doing so claimed his life, but for Vector Prime, death wasn't really the end. His unique life spent travelling in space and time meant that while he might die in one time, he would always exist in other times and dimensions, past and future, watching over his friends from beyond time. And it was in this fashion that he intervened in Optimus Prime and Galvatron's final battle, reaching through the veil of time to give Optimus his sword. One of the last figures released in the Cybertron toy line was a recolor of Vector Prime's toy, representing one of these temporal echoes of the ancient bot. Over the next few years, Vector Prime made several appearances in different series, which included battling his insane brother Logos Prime in Beast Wars Reborn, aiding the time-lost human Xiao Xiao Li in Kiss Players, and sharing his knowledge in the pages of the Transformers animated Allspark Almanac guidebooks. Additionally, his toy was re-released with yet another new colour scheme in the Transformers Universe line in 2009. During these years, it was Hasbro's position that Vector and all the original 13 Primes were special beings known as multiversal singularities. This meant that across all the different infinite Transformers universes, there was only one Vector Prime, and that all the versions of him seen in these different stories were actually the same being, travelling from dimension to dimension. However, at the time of Vector's introduction, the full details of the Prime story hadn't yet been developed, and over the next few years, as Hasbro continued to flesh out their definitive vision for the group as part of their new aligned continuity, they decided they didn't want to be constrained by the rules of past stories. As such, they chose to drop the singularity idea, introducing a new, separate incarnation of Vector Prime, whose story was told in the 2011 novel Exiles and the 2013 guidebook The Covenant of Primus. The aligned incarnation of Vector was the second of the 13 Primes to be created, a stoic and serious bot who believed Primus and his creations to be infallible. He wielded an artifact called the Blades of Time, which could open doorways into extra-dimensional realms where Vector performed his work protecting the integrity of time and space. After the Primes defeated Unicron, their power-hungry brother, Liege Maximo, manipulated them into fighting amongst themselves. This crushed Vector's belief in his siblings' infallibility, and he exiled himself to a pocket dimension, leaving the Blades of Time behind him. The pieces of the blades came to be scattered across the universe, but millions of years later they were found and reassembled by Optimus Prime, enabling the Autobot leader to open the doorway to Vector's dimension and consult the ancient bot for advice. Vector also briefly returned to television in 2015's Robots in Disguise, when he and the other Primes gathered to lend their power to Optimus for an impending battle with their fallen brother, Megatronus. It was also in 2015 that the Collectors Club relaunched Ask Vector Prime as a Facebook page. The page was hosted by the Singularity version of Vector from earlier stories, whose many lives lived across the multiverse allowed him to answer all sorts of questions about Transformers continuity and lore from fans. He also shared details of his own history, like the various forms he'd taken in different worlds, including one based on the transforming Watch Robo toy created by Takara in the 1980s, and an ill-fated romance with the Autobot Scorpia. However, following on from Hasbro's decision to drop the singularity idea for the aligned continuity, towards the end of the year, the club chose to eliminate the concept entirely via a comic in which Nexus Prime used the power of the Star Saber to split all singularities into infinite different separate incarnations, one for every universe in the multiverse. As a consequence, the Facebook page changed to being hosted by one of these new versions of Vector, a retired professor of multiversal studies from a world of highly evolved Transformers. The feature concluded with Vector Prime's voice actor from Cybertron, Richard Newman, returning to narrate a farewell video in which Vector was sent on a research mission to the planet Nebulos. A happy ending that allowed the old bot to renew his relationships with his universe's versions of Safeguard and Scorpia. With the abandonment of the singularity concept, new series have been free to reimagine the Primes as they see fit. Some of the most notable reinventions have been in IDW Publishing's comic books, in which Vector and his siblings weren't divine beings, but simply tribal leaders on prehistoric Cybertron, and in 2018's Power of the Primes toy line, in which their sparks were contained within tiny robots known as Prime Masters. The Prime Masters could grant the powers of the Primes to other Transformers, represented by the toys converting into Spark mode and plugging into the larger figures in the series. To shield their power from detection, the Prime Masters concealed themselves within suits of armor. The Vector Prime Master suit was based on the Autobot Pretender, Metalhawk, and could transform into a gun for larger toys to wield. This was Vector Prime's most recent appearance, and as to where he'll appear next, or if he'll ever get another toy, well, as is always the case with this ancient bot, finding out is only a matter of time. And those are the basics on Vector Prime. If you could time travel to one great moment in Transformers history, let me know in the comments which one you'd pick. If you enjoyed this trip through Transformers history, subscribe and check out over 150 more videos like it, plus get early access to new videos by supporting the show on Patreon.